Hi, Victoria. How are you?
Hey, good evening, Katarina. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good too. I'm surrounded by fireflies actually right now.
Oh my gosh,
It's
that's
so
gotta be good luck. It's gotta be
yeah.
really magical good luck.
Yeah, the other day at dinner they came like close. Yeah, there's right there. A few. All
Can
of
you
them.
photograph them? Can you video them at all? Can you capture them somehow that way?
Yeah, I tried a bunch of times.
Digitally?
I'll try again. It's really because they randomly pops up the light. So if you follow one, but I'll try.
Yeah, I
I'll
know,
try.
I know.
Like,
That's how they are. They're on and off. I've only seen them twice in my life, and it is breathtaking. It's so exciting.
So there are none in Oregon or California? Because
No,
unfortunately,
nowhere I've ever lived. The only thing, hello, Guru, hello, Jennifer. The only thing I've ever seen in Oregon is a little glowworm. It was on a trail, and I saw this glistening thing. I'd see it a lot, and I always thought somebody dropped a little piece of a candy wrapper, like foil, and then it just was, I was seeing it too regularly, and I picked it up, and it was a little worm. I mean, it's a glowworm. That's it. I don't know if it has a flying counterpart, but that's it.
yeah. So I think I also only saw them the first time here on when I came to the U.S. here on the East Coast, in the north of the East Coast.
Oh, okay, they're not in Portugal. Yeah, I've only seen them in Fiesole in Italy. It's a beautiful hilly town, and they're kind of flying houses in the background and lights. It's so dramatic, and yeah, they're just magical. We should try to bring them to Science Society.
Yeah, we should. We should do a room about them. Um, yeah, I saw Gulruk. I hope I'm saying your name right. Hi, thanks for popping by. So today is good to learn if you don't like exercise, but you like the effects of exercise. The scientist is working on a cheat, basically. He saw basically, but he will talk about it later. I don't want to take away his story, but he basically saw what gets produced in the body through exercise, and then he figured out basically he's figuring out how you can basically induce that in a person, but more disease related for people that have disorders. But I told my husband about this. This is the room for him. But anyways, welcome everyone.
Your husband is not a fan of a good workout.
Well, if it's like playing soccer or tennis or something, then yes. But just going to the gym and doing exercise, that's not his thing.
Oh my
So
gosh, well that makes so much sense. Yeah, I
yeah,
think, I mean, even though, okay, I admit it, I like that kind of thing, but it seems so artificial, just to be lifting things up on purpose. When my kids were little and I was carrying them around a lot, there was no way I was ever going to do weight training, because I just totally stopped doing that, because I was lifting little people up all day long, and so to lift something for no good reason when it wasn't even crying or hungry just seemed so ridiculous. So yeah, I agree with your husband. Soccer.
yeah,
It's
like
fun.
he used to like surfing, but then this year he got hurt. Like a wave really pushed him around, and he dislocated his shoulder. and he was using the scooter the other day with my daughter, and he fell on his knee like I don't know. I told him he needs to stretch more or something. Like he got really mad. I said, older men like have to stretch more because they get no, like especially in the legs. Like it's not even a lie, and he got upset. So
I
anyway.
have a feeling he might be upset if he were here now. Maybe we need a disclaimer, or he needs a disclaimer.
Oh, he's fine.
Everything you hear here about
Nobody
Katarina's
knows his name.
husband stays in Science Society.
Yeah, nobody knows his name. It's incognito. Anyways. Hi, Joyce. Come up.
Hey, Joyce,
Hello.
welcome.
Hi.
Are you here
Yeah,
to sing a
no,
song?
I was just saying we know each other a little better after the other night when the guest asked us for little
Oh,
biographies.
that was such a nice thing. I loved that he turned it around on us. We had to be flexible. It was great.
I
Hi, James. Hi, Christian, Anna.
I agree. This was great. It was a great experience. And I was in Joyce's room the other day. It was really good. So it's bonding. We should do that more. Sharing our stories, bonding time. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hoping Victoria's going to sing for us again today.
I was worried I would hear something like that. So I was in a room the other day with James, and for some reason I did bust out. I'm just a love machine.
I've had it.
I
I've
don't work.
legitimately had it stuck. I'm trying to think if it's been a week, but I have had that song stuck in my head since you sang it. I'm just a love machine, and I won't work for nobody but you.
Ooh, baby. Yeah, it's true, it happened. Maybe that's a first in Science Society that we're singing to our guests. But
Well, we had instruments playing. What was it again? Who played an instrument? We had the music neuroscience room about how music is perceived and pitch. Perfect pitch room. Do you remember?
I do remember. And it followed a language room. It was a room about. I do remember.
We
There
speak
was.
Franglish, the French language room.
Oui, un peu.
No,
No, pas, no. Notre salle, peut-être. No, it was in here in Science Society. Katarina, do you remember? It was something about the effects of language learning
Yes,
on
on the
something.
on the musicality, and the other way around, musicality on learning language in children.
Okay. Okay, so it was one room, and I'm remembering it as two because it was two really interesting topics in one.
Yeah, it was. We'll start in 5 minutes. Thank you everyone for coming. Sorry, I have to be on hotel, and my daughter is scared to go by herself somewhere. Sorry.
I was just going to tell Katerina that I haven't been to very many countries in Europe, but one of the countries I was in was Portugal, and I really loved it.
Oh, nice. Where have you been in Portugal?
Well, I went to a conference in Portugal, and it was in Porto. So that was the place we were in the most. But the rest of Portugal, we just, traveled through on the train, and it was beautiful looking at it through the window. And in Porto, I really didn't take too much time to sightsee, unfortunately, because I was at the conference. But I did take a day and took a bus that had an open air where you sit on top of the bus all around Porto, and it was just a wonderful day.
That's my
That's where you're from, Porto? don't think I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that my mic was hot. Yes, I believe she's Catarina's from Porto.
I have a refrigerator magnet of Porto, a scene from Porto. I didn't buy a bunch of souvenirs, but I have a refrigerator magnet with it.
Catarina, are you having mic issues? We can't hear you. Well, I hope someday to also have such a refrigerator magnet, Joyce. I haven't been yet, but it's coming up. Welcome, Costa. Welcome, Eric. Oh, that's a really cute PTR, Eric. Well, we'll start in about 2 minutes. Chances that we'll start are even better if the guest speaker arrives. I should say when the guest speaker arrives. So Joyce, what were you in Portugal for? Was it
It was
holiday?
it was a conference. It was the International Congress on Autoimmunity, and I was co-author on a paper that was being presented there, and it was a very interesting conference. But I would have liked to see more, but I just didn't have a lot of time scheduled there. And so one day had to be it.
Oh, that is short, but a beautiful one day, I'm sure.
Yeah. The rest of the time I was at the conference. Although we did sightsee a little bit in Spain, I think, when we were getting ready for the airplane trip out of Spain. But then the only other country I've been to besides that in Europe is Switzerland. And that was way back when I was in high school. And our high school band and drill team got invited to Switzerland. And we raised the money and we went.
We've been to some
Can you
wonderful
guys?
places.
Hi,
Hello, John.
John.
Yes, we hear you now.
Hi,
And
hi.
John
Can
has
you hear me?
arrived. Yes, we hear everyone now. Katarina, we hear you. We hear John. John, welcome.
Perfect. Thank you for coming. Please let me know if at some point you can't hear me. I hope it works out now. And yeah, Joyce, just a quick note. Yeah, that's my hometown. It's Porto, but I don't know if you could hear it earlier. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, John, for coming. And I think we can start. Welcome to Science Society. We are so glad you made it.
I'm glad I made it. I'm still trying. I'm still trying to learn how to use Clubhouse.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you found the unmute button. That's the most important one, I would say, so we can hear you speak. And everything else, uh, we can, we will monitor for you. So don't worry about the rest.
Okay.
Perfect. So before we start, I'll give a short introduction to the audience so they get to know you, and then Victoria will ask you a couple of interview questions, and then the stage is yours to talk about your really interesting, cool research.
Okay. Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Welcome everyone to the Science Society, and of course, a special warm welcome to you, John. And Dr. John Long, he's a principal investigator, assistant professor of pathology and chemistry at Stanford, and he received his bachelor in biochemistry with summa cum laude from Columbia University, New York. And he completed his PhD in chemistry at the Scripps Research Institute in the laboratory of Benjamin Cravath. After his PhD, he did a postdoc in Boston, and then later he was instructor of cell biology in Bruce Spiegelman's lab at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute at Harvard Medical School. And there he started investigating the biochemical and bioenergetic basis of mammalian energy metabolism. And since 2018, John, as I said, is the assistant professor of pathology and chemistry institute scholar at Stanford University. And he received different awards. And yeah, it's such an honor to have you here. And
Happy to be
yeah,
here.
thank you. And Victoria, the stage is yours for the questions. Thank you.
All right, welcome. And I would also like to say welcome, Dr. Shah. We're glad you're here. And John.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and everyone.
All right, so we'll get started. Katarina, thank you for sharing John's information. And John, my question to you is to just learn a bit more about you before you start into your talk. So if you can think back through your life and think about when you first felt that you had a special connection to science, that science was something that you really identified with or was so interesting to you, then can you please tell us about that?
You know, I wish I had a great story,
No pressure.
but I
Seriously,
have a
no
very,
pressure.
I have a very pedestrian story about how I got to the job that I'm doing now, which is that when I was a kid, actually, what I tended to gravitate towards was more, you know, the analytical math and engineering and these kinds of things. But by the time I got to college and I saw what, you know, like professional mathematics looked like, I mean, it's just totally ridiculous. I don't understand. You know, I couldn't understand half of what was going on in my math courses. And it was around that time that my parents, you know, thought it'd be a good idea to go to med school. And being like, you know, a good Chinese boy, I was like, well, I guess I might as well take the med school prereqs. But then I realized that I didn't want to go to med school either. Because at that time, I just got much more interested in sort of, I was working in a lab, a chemistry lab at the time, and I really got interested in just thinking about the problems and doing the research. And I thought that, you know, that sort of suited my personality best. And so that's sort of how I ended up in research. It was sort of a meandering, you know, this wasn't suitable, that wasn't suitable. But I think I've always had an interest in sort of understanding things and trying to figure stuff out. And so that certainly helped along the way.
Thank you. It's so you were following your interests. You were following what worked for you, and I hear there is a common thread here that people. What's really one thing that's really attracting people, not necessarily to the specific branches of study, but is being exactly what you said, being interested in thinking about problems and learning how to solve them, and feeling that doing their PhD work or their master's, whatever, that would provide them with the tools to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, you know, in my case too, sort of what you're talking about, you know, this idea of solving problems, I think I was really encouraged in my undergrad. And when I was sort of doing, at that time, sort of chemistry research, I was sort of surprised by the fact that even as an undergrad, you could learn stuff about your system, you know. And it's like I'd taken like 2 chemistry classes and I got in this lab, and I don't know, you know, why the investigator even let me in there. I didn't have any sort of serious experience at that point. But with so little information, to actually be able to understand something, even at a small scale, I think was incredibly encouraging. And so I think that's sort of what kept me going from then on down this path of continuing research and continuing to discover in the biological sciences.
Yeah, thank you. So can you take us from that lab, from when you
Hmm.
began there to up until this present time? Maybe some events that happened along the way that have brought you to the research that you're about to present to us?
I think, you know, at a sort of a fundamental level, um, the work that I've been sort of broadly interested in is in the realm of physiology and metabolism and medicine. And I find this to be interesting not only because of sort of the human health implications, but I think especially for metabolism. I mean, this is something that I'm thinking about all the time, right? Like you eat 3 meals a day. After breakfast, you're thinking about lunch. After lunch, you're thinking about dinner. Um, most mornings, I'm on my elliptical doing some exercise. I think it's just really interesting that the body has all these different homeostatic mechanisms for regulating metabolism. And I guess I came to this because originally, as I mentioned, I was at Columbia. I was studying chemistry, and but I knew that sort of just studying chemistry itself wasn't sort of sufficiently fulfilling. It still seemed sort of far removed from my day-to-day living. And so from there, I sort of moved into biochemistry during my PhD. And then as I sort of learned more and more about biochemistry and physiology, eventually I sort of developed a large enough toolkit that I could actually start to address some of these questions that I'd long been interested in, like with diet and exercise and metabolism generally, but I didn't quite have the chops to deal with when I was just starting off in research. And so I guess that's sort of the short version of that story.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And so, yeah, that's a great lead in for you to begin because now we're really excited and interested to hear more about what you've done with those questions about metabolism and diet and exercise. So, you're welcome to begin your talk right now, and if you would like at the end we can have a Q&A, or if you'd like to have a
Hmm.
Q&A along the way. That's up to you too. And as Katarina mentioned, we'll handle everything else like people asking questions, or sometimes people, audience friends here are welcome to put questions also in the room chat, and we can share those with you too. So you're welcome to begin, and we have your PDF pinned at the top, so if you'd like to refer to that, go right ahead. And the mic
Great.
is yours. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Victoria. So, I just want to say, like, I would prefer this not to be a monologue, if possible. I haven't sort of prepared any type of, soliloquy here. So I'll just start by very briefly summarizing our main findings, and then I'll just sort of open it up for discussion. I think in the Q&A that might bring out some more questions or things that you guys are all interested in, that so that when I'm talking it might be more relevant for what you want to know. But basically, the motivation for this kind of work is that we all know that exercise is good for you, but for something that's so plainly obvious, it's remarkable how little we actually understand about how exercise works and the molecular mechanisms, that mediate the benefits of exercise. And so, part of the research program in my lab is geared towards this idea of trying to capture the molecules of exercise, with the idea that if you can understand those molecules, then you might be able to, in the future, pharmacologically hijack those pathways to develop the next generation of medicines for all the things that exercise is good for, which include, for example, frailty and osteoporosis and sarcopenia and brain health and cardiometabolic health and so on. And so uh, what this paper is about is really our efforts in this direction. We used an approach called metabolomics to try to find exercise regulated molecules in the blood. And to our surprise, it turns out that humans and sled dogs and racehorses and mice and rats and basically anything that moves, they all turn on the same molecule in the blood. And that molecule is called Lac-Phe. And the way that Lac-Phe is made is that it's made from lactate. So essentially, the harder you work out in terms of your ability to produce lactate, the more Lac-Phe you can make. What that also means is that in certain types of exercise, like if you're walking slowly, you don't make that much Lac-Phe because you don't produce that much lactate. And what Lac-Phe does is very interesting. It turns out that it's actually a chemical messenger that goes to your brain to regulate appetite. And so we think that at least part of the reason that you feel like you're going to vomit after a hard workout is because your body is producing a lot of Lac-Phe. Probably the strongest evidence that we have for this is that we've engineered mice to be deficient in their ability to make Lac-Phe. And what happens is that when you exercise these mice, they continue to eat after exercise and they get fat. Okay, so that sort of really says that this Lac-Phe molecule is part of the appetite suppression effect that's associated with really intense exercise. So that's sort of the summary of this work and the context that it's done. And I think sort of as we think about moving forward, we're very much interested in trying to understand more about how Lac-Phe works to regulate feeding. There are lots of different circuits in the brain that are involved in feeding control, and we're interested in understanding both the Lac-Phe receptors as well as the neuronal circuits that Lac-Phe is tapping into to suppress feeding behaviors. We're also interested, of course, in potential other functions of Lac-Phe because basically we think about this as like an exercise-inducible neurotransmitter. And so we're wondering about, well, exercise is really good for brain health in all sorts of other ways. Maybe Lac-Phe is important for all of those other types of responses to exercise, such as, for example, improvements in mood or cognition or protection against neurodegeneration. Okay, so with that, that's sort of my spiel, and I'm very happy to open it up to Q&A. I'm happy to hear your questions about this work or about exercise more generally. Yeah, I'll just open up the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving this wonderful introduction and for sharing with us, the motivation of your work and the story behind it. That's also always really interesting. So, yeah, if people have questions, please flash your microphone or write in the chat. I'll read out the questions then, and then we go from there. But Dr. Shah Joyce, if you want to go ahead. If not, I'll ask a question first. I'll wait for you to flash a microphone. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. And it's really interesting that you could find the exercise, metabolite that you could control food intake. We had recently also a guest here that talked about food intake control, and that it's really interesting to see these advances that are being made here. And so probably the first question we all have: how long does it take until we can just take it and we don't need to
Yeah,
do
exercise in a pill
that?
and you don't have to worry about it, right? I mean, this I have to say, like, this is by far the most popular question that I get asked about this. The answer is going to be not anytime soon, but I can also give you a more detailed answer than that. So, as you mentioned, the control of feeding is just like such a fascinating and interesting thing. And especially if you talk to people, I mean, I guess it's most fascinating because you have, pathologic eating disorders on both sides of the spectrum. And even sort of for normal folks like you and I, sometimes it can feel like I can't help but eat more, or I can't help but, I'm not hungry, right? And what's interesting to me as someone who thinks about chemistry and medicine and physiology about that kind of uh, uh, that kind of feeling that you have about food intake and feeding control is that tells you that this must be under tight regulation. And in fact, we now understand that the control of feeding is under tight hormonal regulation. Okay. So over the last, let's say 30 years, there have been probably half a dozen molecules that have been described that control feeding behaviors. Some are extremely famous, right? These are like the leptins and the ghrelins. And then some are more mysterious, such as, GDF15 and some of the gut peptides and so on. And this gets to your question, because I think looking at this sort of constellation of other feeding hormones helps provide a context and a blueprint for how to think about the therapeutic development of Lac-Phe. I would love if Lac-Phe, this pathway, could be therapeutically harnessed for the treatment of, let's say, obesity and diabetes, or to help, somebody lose a few pounds here and there in a safe way. But what we've learned from all these other appetite hormones is that there have been about, let's say, 10 described so far. One turns out to be $1 billion blockbuster drug. Okay. The drug is called liraglutide and semaglutide, and it's based off a pathway called the GLP-1 pathway. There are others that have never been successfully translated to human studies for one reason or another. Okay, maybe the pathway is not wired the same in humans. Maybe there's dose-limiting toxicity, right? And then there's like every example in the middle. Okay, there are some that are still currently in clinical development. There are some that work, like leptin works in people, but only if you're leptin deficient, and there's only a handful of people that fall into that category. Okay, and so how Lac-Phe eventually will play out in sort of a therapeutic sense is anybody's guess. But what I would say is that based on those historical examples that I've enumerated, it could be in any of those buckets, right? It could be the next billion-dollar drug. It could just never be successfully translated to people. And we're trying to do experiments to figure that out right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's kind of, of course, everyone doesn't like to count till 15, 3 hours a day, But I was thinking, for people that may be paralyzed or, other type
Yeah.
of impairments that kind of is unrealistic for them to do real exercise. But I would imagine that inducing that artificially, that effect could increase quality of life and lifespan.
Oh, you know what? And I think I think this is really the main take-home message, right? Because, in a way, when I talk about capturing the molecules of exercise, this is on one hand a very strange kind of idea, because you think, well, exercise is so complicated, there must be so many molecules and so many pathways involved. How do you even dissect this into single molecules? But on the other hand, we are already, in a sense, doing this. And the sense that we're doing this is actually in the context not of health, but of performance, right? Because we know about the molecules of exercise for performance. You can dope off those molecules, right? These are, for example, anabolic steroids, peptides that are growth factors, and you can improve human performance that way. And yet, the sort of corresponding molecules of exercise associated with human health, where you could try to dope off those molecules for exactly what you're talking about. Let's say someone who can't exercise, right, but maybe wants to harness a pathway related to mood or some other aspect of quality of life. That knowledge is simply not there. And so I think that is ultimately the long-term goal. And whether that will be with Lac-Phe or some other molecule, that remains an area that we're actively looking at right now.
Yeah, that's wondrful. And so, how many athletes organizations are writing to you if they want the
Yeah.
first? Because I would say it would be really hard to detect any doping if you just use molecules that are part of. I'm sorry to go there, but these are like, it's Clubhouse. You can a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
Like,
interesting. I mean, it's interesting. So, for example, it is possible. So, if we're just moving away from, let's say, lack. So, the short answer for your specific question is so far no athletes have contacted me. But I do know, like, there are, forums on Reddit and Let's Run and stuff like that where athletes are writing about this. So they're, it's sort of in the, it's in the sort of ethos and in the air. But what I would say is that, when athletes do dope, they are doping off endogenous substances, right? So, for example, testosterone is, and other anabolic steroids like testosterone are naturally occurring molecules. And so that is a mechanism that is used. And in fact, we can detect exogenous testosterone using sort of very interesting and fancy analytical chemistry methods. And so I think, if this were to go into the realm of doping, I guess, first of all, I'm not sure what the indication would be. But even if that were the case, I think it would be detectable. And I think it's, testosterone sort of case in point there.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I'm sorry to go there, but yeah, Victoria, Dr. Shah, Joyce, do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, John. I mean, that was very interesting and fascinating work. My question exactly, I waited for the end of the, conversation to ask you about the IGF-1 because we know about the role of the IGF-1. We call it as a mitogenic as well as the
Hmm.
anti-apoptotic activity that we know it from the IGF and the role of the IGF-1 in different kind of cancer, include the colorectal cancer. And that was very amazing that you just described about that. And we know about the higher methylation in those people that they have a high index or BMI. So I was just wondering, maybe you have any side notes that you can share with us about your finding in relation with the
Hmm.
cancer treatment.
In relationship to cancer treatment, was that the
Yeah,
question?
because you're thinking about the drug
Hmm.
development, and I was just wondering whatever you can share with us through that.
Yeah, so, I guess the way that, so the short answer is I don't have, we are looking at this, but kind of indirectly. Okay. And the way that we're thinking about the cancer angle is sort of twofold. The first is that exercise is good for many, many things. We know sort of when we think about it in sort of normal day-to-day living, we think about sort of the cardiometabolic benefits, the mood benefits, these kinds of things. But actually, it's, in a pretty reasonable number of clinical studies, exercise has been shown to be beneficial during sort of cancer treatment as well, both for sort of the overall cardiometabolic health of the individual patients, but also for the tumors, in terms of sort of reducing tumor size. So that's very interesting. And so we're thinking about whether Lac-Phe might be participating, um, as sort of, in that type of process. And we don't have any data right now, but that's sort of the idea. The other way that we're thinking about it is that, basically what our studies in this paper point to is this idea that whenever you're producing a lot of lactate, like in exercise, you're also producing a lot of Lac-Phe because this is derived from lactate. And another context where there's a lot of lactate being produced is actually in certain types of cancers, because these tumors have what's called the Warburg effect, where basically they undergo a ton of glycolysis to produce a ton of lactate. And in those types of tumors, we're wondering, could they be producing Lac-Phe, and could that be, for example, associated with cachexia or other wasting diseases that are associated with cancer? So, for instance, you might know that when Steve Jobs, towards the end of his life, was suffering from pancreatic cancer, one of the sort of most stark visual images was that he was, sort of wasting, right? He had lost a tremendous amount of weight. And that's because in the particular type of pancreatic cancer that he had, one of the side effects, not the side effect, but one of the major endocrine effects of that tumor was to cause muscle atrophy and wasting. Now, it could be possible that high levels of Lac-Phe might, you know, in a pathologic sense, mediate some aspects of cancer cachexia and sort of the weight loss associated with cancer cachexia. And so that's sort of the other way that we're thinking about this as well.
So do you think that we can just use the, for example, liquid biopsy for catching that as a marker?
Yeah, I mean, you can detect it in blood for sure, and we're trying to do that now. So one of the questions, I mean, the when we're trying to look at Lac-Phe in blood in the humans for this particular study, we're mostly looking at a context of exercise. And what we're trying to do now is to go across essentially thousands of individuals in extremely well phenotyped and genotyped human cohorts, like the Jackson Heart study, or, for example, framing, and trying to measure Lac-Phe levels and trying to determine, if you if you look at baseline Lac-Phe levels, that tell you anything about, for example, the cardiometabolic health of the individual that it came from. One of the things that we're finding that makes it complicated is that the levels of Lac-Phe are also, or can be affected by the amount of activity that you've had, as we show in this paper. So, for example, if you are getting your blood drawn, but you're sort of a little bit late and you're running to your doctor's office, that will increase the amount of Lac-Phe you have in your blood. So that turns out to be a confounder in the actual measurements across these large human cohorts. So we're trying to tease all that apart right now, and I think eventually we'll try to, with the ultimate goal of all that work is to determine whether, in sort of a liquid biopsy sense, we can use Lac-Phe as a marker or something useful.
Well, I have a question. I had heard sort of that this was common wisdom or something like that, and I was just checking to see what it said on the internet when I Googled it, and it seemed to be that they were saying that in general, that people as a weight loss method, that just exercising did not typically work. Although it said that some studies showed that maybe in some people it could. But for most people, they also have to change, work at changing their diet. And I was just thinking, it seems like it must be a bit more complex. For one thing, if you do exercise more, your body does really need more calories, so that it would be evolutionarily not a good idea to suppress your energy, your intake of food too much just because you
Mhm.
were exercising. It would be counterproductive, and so I'm thinking it must be more complex. Or what would you
And
say?
you're absolutely correct. I mean, it always is, because whenever you're talking about sort of a chemical messenger system or a hormone system, as we think Lac-Phe is, there's always going to be counter-regulatory hormones and other, processes that kick in. And I think sort of anecdotally, we all understand this already, because, for example, if you are going for a leisurely hike for an hour and you come back, I mean, for me, I'm totally starving, right? But that's a very different feeling than when someone tells you to run, like half-mile repeats on the track. I mean, after that, you feel like you're going to vomit. And so I think really the takeaway from this is that the effect of exercise on feeding control is complicated depending on the type of exercise and the duration and the intensity. We think that at least with short-term, acute, hard exercise, that Lac-Phe is one of the mechanisms that's responsible for suppressing feeding. But then there are probably counter-regulatory pathways that are kicking in with exercise that's either longer in duration or lower in intensity. But one other thing I'll just mention, because you sort of brought up this idea of the sort of evolutionary thinking about this pathway, is that, classically we have the autonomic nervous system response to fleeing away from a predator, which is sort of the precursor for what we call exercise in modern day. And what that is like, in the old days when we were all living in caves and you had a predator chasing you, right? The autonomic nervous system response to that is you shut down digestion so that you can direct glucose to your muscles so that you can run faster and flee from the predator. And of course, that gives you an intuitive sense of that in sort of the acute high intensity exercise, you actually want to shut down your digestion so that you can preserve your life. And so what we think about here is that Lac-Phe and this sort of appetite suppressing chemical messenger system is a hormone-like system that works in parallel with the autonomic nervous system response. Now, of course, once you have fled from the predator, right, other types of systems kick in to help you recoup the energy that you've just expended and to help promote feeding at that point. And that's not what we're saying Lac-Phe does under those conditions. I mean, there must be other molecules involved there. But at least for the short term, in that sort of running away from a lion type scenario, that's sort of where we think Lac-Phe is operational.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. So your body is basically because of that acute effort that you've put out. It's really stressed your body, and the body's saying, uh-oh, that predator might still be around, you better be careful and you better not
Right.
eat, and yeah, I could see that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for those questions and for answering. It's really interesting to think about that perspective. Apparently, it if you look at from from an algorithmic kind of way, it just primes this decision to not eat and focus on being able to run a behavior. Like it bumps it up instead of having the priority to eat. um, that's really interesting. Do you maybe see that also in, did you think of checking in women that are about to have babies, if that is also increased?
Yeah, so I mean, right. So the short answer is we don't know. We're looking and we're trying to find, at least in humans, sort of all the diverse situations that you can find where appetite is regulated. Okay. So what you mentioned is an extremely interesting situation. During pregnancy, there's intense physiologic, and hormonal changes in the body. And my wife right now is pregnant. Okay, where she's let's see, we're almost in the third trimester. But I remember for a few weeks there, she just couldn't stop eating, right? And she was like voraciously, and there's like crazy cravings too. And so what we're thinking is that we're trying to examine that type of behavior and to ask, well, maybe Lac-Phe is also, maybe the suppression of Lac-Phe is mediating some of those bouts of behavior. We're thinking about other things. So, for example, people who are on a very common diabetes medication called metformin, uh, occasionally they report that their appetite is actually suppressed. And so, metformin, the sort of the mechanism by which metformin suppresses uh, feeding or body weight is not at all well established. And we're also wondering, well, maybe in that case, Lac-Phe might be playing a role. And so we're sort of looking very broadly at different physiologic states um, for different types of conditions when your impulse to eat is regulated in a different way. And we're trying to use those as sort of motivation for trying to understand, does the effect of Lac-Phe extend beyond exercise alone?
Yeah, that's go ahead, Dr. Shah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering because you mentioned about the metformin and the increase. I mean, actually, is it doesn't decrease the appetite; it's reversely increase the appetite. And I was just wondering about the sample. Is that part of your research? Because one of the side effects from the metformin is dependent what patient we are talking about, is increasing appetite, not
Yeah,
decreasing, and weight gain.
yeah, right. So you're absolutely right that it's sort of a complicated literature across across all the different studies. I think in there are a handful of studies that indicate that metformin can suppress body weight, and there is some also. I mean, albeit it's in mouse. There's some supporting mouse data that suggests there are different mechanisms responsible for that. And it could be possible, absolutely, that metformin works to lower blood glucose in all people, and it has differential effects on feeding and body weight, depending on the particular individual or the cohorts that are examined there. And we're trying to tease that out. So, for example, one of the things that we're doing is we're partnering with the Stanford Endocrinology and Diabetes Clinic here, and we're trying to just essentially run a clinical trial where we're looking at metformin and its effects on body weight and then its effects on Lac-Phe levels. And so, for instance, maybe in those individuals that are taking metformin that have suppressed body weight, those are the individuals where you have a metformin inducible Lac-Phe spike. And maybe in those individuals where metformin leads to actually weight gain, as you're talking about, maybe in those cases what you actually see is suppression of Lac-Phe in those individuals. And so we're trying to look at that question right now.
Yeah, because I mean, I know about the longevity, and they are using for introducing metformin as a longevity pill. And because we are just, when we are talking about the diabetes patient or such a thing, there is a different mechanism that we should take. And another question that I had that was about the immune response. And did you found any further information around the immune response in your research?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and we're looking into that now. We don't have any sort of leads on that. One of the sort of very surprising aspects of our work was the finding that Lac-Phe is mostly produced in immune cells. And so that tells you that immune cells are highly responsive to physical activity. And we're trying to understand, might there be, for example, paracrine or autocrine mechanisms where Lac-Phe is directly acting on immune cells themselves to somehow regulate immune function? We have no idea. But one sort of provocative thinking in that vein is that exercise sort of has an acute pro-inflammatory, is sort of an acute pro-inflammatory stimulus that then becomes, in sort of a chronic sense, an anti-inflammatory intervention. And so we're wondering, might Lac-Phe play a role in those types of responses? We don't really have any good data one way or another right now.
Yeah, it made me think of when you said it affected the immune cells, that how it's been discovered that stress is pro-inflammatory because, for the same reasons you're talking about. If the lion was about to eat you, your body throughout evolution has acquired the ability to be ready for that injury that's about to happen and get the immune system all geared up for that. And so it seems like that could be connected with what you're saying about that particular substance affecting immune
Yeah,
cells.
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting, when you start to think about sort of the evolution of these things and the fight and flight response, and sort of that very classical physiological literature, there's a lot of sort of interesting nuggets there that sort of tie back to our current work here. Because, of course, at that time when they were working out the physiology of that type of response to like a predator and things like this, of course, they didn't have the very advanced, analytical tools that we have today, and the modern tools that we have today to basically look deeper and more broadly at the chemical composition of our bodies. And so it's sort of interesting now with these new tools, we're finding out all these new molecules, but the physiology is still the same. I mean, that was the physiology they discovered, 50 years ago or more. And so then it becomes sort of an interesting question, trying to sort of bring back to life that old literature and thinking of that old literature in the context of this new data.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, oh,
No, go ahead.
I was wondering, I'm not sure if you said this or not, but what was the general kind of parameters of what was the type and amount and length of exercise that caused this effect versus the kind that made you very hungry?
Right. So as far as we can tell, the time when you produce the most Lac-Phe is under high intensity sprint exercise. And so the study that we actually did in the paper, we took a cohort of, turns out, Danish individuals. The study was actually done at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And these were 8 healthy young men, and we had them come back week after week after week, and each week they did something different. So in the first week, they did nothing. So that was sort of the control group. In the second week, we gave them a sprint exercise, and this consisted of a Wingate test where they're asked to go on a bike and go all out for 30 seconds. So it's extremely short, extremely high intensity. The third week, they came back and they were asked to do an endurance exercise where they were asked to cycle for 1 hour at 50% VO2 max. So this is sort of moderate to low intensity for an hour. And then the last week they came back and they did resistance exercise. And in that case, they were asked to do leg curls at a certain intensity where basically 10 reps was to failure, and they did 3 sets of that. And it turns out that, the levels of Lac-Phe are induced maybe 2 or 3-fold with the resistance training and with the endurance training. But with the sprint training, I mean, Lac-Phe just goes through the roof, like 10-fold or more. And the way that we basically think about that, so to answer your question, right, basically, the more lactate you can produce, the more Lac-Phe you will produce because it's derived from lactate. And so when you think about when is lactate production the highest, it's always under this like high intensity sprint type exercise. And what that is sort of, the reason that's interesting is, of course, it's also that high intensity sprint exercise that's sort of where you get that vomiting type of feeling, where you feel like, oh, I'm really feeling nauseous. And so sort of the slight stretch of the interpretation is that Lac-Phe is in part mediating that nauseous feeling after a hard workout.
Okay, that's good. Although it seems like if you'd feel too nauseated after doing that, and this was the situation of a predator, it might kind of interfere with your escaping, but I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I know that nauseous feeling quite well, but it's really so. What's the time span that you have to do exercise? Like, what's the limit? What do we have to do to get this effect?
As far as we can tell, a 30-second all-out bout on a bike is enough.
Oh my God!
But when I
Thank
say all out, I mean it's like really intense. So if you so I did this on myself because I was curious, and I thought well these Danish folk, they shouldn't be having all the fun to in these experiments. So the experiment that was done in Copenhagen and the one that we were reproducing here at Stanford, it's called a Wingate test. And I didn't know anything about what this was, so I started to Google and YouTube some of this. It turns out Wingate tests are often used in the NHL as a test of maximal anaerobic power. And so there are these like really incredible videos of the of just like these like NHL players going all out, on a bike for 30 seconds. And it's just incredibly intense. So I saw this and I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. And after 30 seconds, I mean, the legs are burning, everything hurts. It is not pleasant to do a 30-second all-out Wingate test. But that is, at least for me, also when my Lac-Phe spikes the most.
That is so cool. Yeah, I appreciate. I do HIIT training, but not
Yes,
for long,
exactly.
like 10 minutes a day. So
Yeah.
that's enough. So I'm good. But
Well,
I used to do it way more, but like since COVID, I got very lazy.
so I used to be, as someone who, I for sort of my whole life, I've been sort of in endurance sports. And I used to be quite skeptical about HIIT because I was just thinking like, how can it be possible that you work out for so little time and reap what they claim are these long-lasting benefits? But actually, after having done this work, I'm more convinced about that. With sort of the biochemical and explanation being that in these like bursts of high intensity workout that don't last very long, what you're actually producing are long lasting endocrine changes in your body, right? I mean, Lac-Phe is a prime example of that. You take this transient signal, which is lactate, and you convert it into a long lasting signal, Lac-Phe, and that sort of causes sort of long term effects. And so I've warmed up to the idea now of HIIT, and I think it does work to some extent. Yeah.
That's wonderful news. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
I was
That
So,
I was just going to say maybe not everyone knows what that is.
oh,
Oh yes, HIIT is a high intensity interval training. HIIT.
so that HIIT training though, if you're somebody with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, then you have another metabolic array going on in your body. Then that increases stress on the body, increases cortisol, as well as insulin, and so weight gain. So how Are you controlling for different situations such as that?
Yeah, no, I'm not. So the so the short answer is no. And I guess, I'm not saying that um, you should go out and do HIIT for this reason or that reason. But what I am saying is that I think what is sort of most interesting from a molecular aspect of this is that, is exactly this kind of discussion. Okay, before you would just talk about, well, there's HIIT and there's aerobic training and there's this and there's that, and you would talk about physical activity in these very, very sort of fluffy ways that are not definitive, right? And one of the advances of this work is that now we're translating that kind of very fuzzy intuition into some concrete things that you can measure. And I think that's going to be important, because now you can start to define, okay, maybe the definition of HIT should be when your Lac-Phe exceeds whatever, 5 micromolar or whatever the concentration is. And so we're sort of starting to enter that realm where we can start to define these things much more exactly, rather than having these very vague prescriptions. So, the way that I sort of come at this as someone who's a chemist and biochemist and interested in drug development is that, if you take a drug, a modern day prescription drug, like maybe you take Lipitor, you'll get a 30-page instruction manual about how to take it. On the first page, they'll tell you this is the chemical substance, it's atorvastatin calcium. This is how you should take it. It's a 50 milligram pill. You should take it once a day or twice a day. Or, and you should not take it if you're pregnant. You should not take it like this. You should take it with food or not, or and so on and so forth for 30 pages. Okay. And if you contrast that with how we prescribe exercise, basically what we say is, well, you should move more than less, and preferably you should spread it throughout the week. And maybe sometimes you should add weight training to that. And so what I'm talking about here is part sort of an intermediate step in capturing the benefits of exercise is also just in understanding the molecules of exercise, so that we can start to be much more rigorous about how we talk about the different types of exercise and what we're actually doing to our bodies under these different kinds of conditions.
And that, what I like about that, is if you kind of in a stressful phase of your life, I don't know, you had a bunch of kids and stuff like that, to tell somebody, yeah, do 5 or 10 minutes, like, but exhaust yourself. It's like less overwhelming than telling, like,
Right,
back time, do 45 minutes cardio and then another half an hour weight training. Like, get lost. Like, when should I ever do that? With 3 kids.
right.
But if and if there's actual benefits of just doing that at least a little bit, yeah, I think that's very. I think you can convince more people of doing at least that. I don't know.
Right.
But Dennis and Sel, welcome to the stage. Do you want to ask something, comment?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the room. This is an amazing place to be. So, thank you. And Dr. John, I had a quick reflection about feeling nauseous when practicing HIIT. There was a very good point made about, well, when feeling nauseous, it might not be the best thing when trying to flee, to survive. And I've been into heat for a while. When I used to eat during daytime, actually I felt nauseous. But now I'm fasting all the time. I only eat at night. And even when I'm into heat, I don't feel nauseous anymore. I feel
Hmm.
exhausted, but not nauseous. So my reflection was, would it be possible that our ancestors, because of the lack of food, used to be, well, which used to be fasting most of the time, so they didn't feel nauseous when having to fight for their lives or flee? Thank you.
I mean, that's an extremely provocative and interesting idea that somehow fasting and sort of entering ketosis and these kinds of things can counteract or at least reduce some of the other effects that you might get when you're in a fed state of molecules like Lac-Phe and maybe other molecules. I mean, that's extremely interesting. I have no idea, and I would just be speculating. But I think what what for sure is true is that, you know, in this type of world of exercise and trying to molecularly dissect this stuff, you know, there are very few absolutes, and a lot of things are context dependent. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that, okay, you know, what we're showing here with the nauseous feeling with, for example, Lac-Phe is only in the fed state, and that if you're in, for example, a ketosis state or you're fasting or something else, that you don't see these kinds of things. I think that's entirely possible.
Thank
I
you
would.
for your
Oh,
answer.
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you finished, Sal?
Yeah, I just said thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to, since we were mentioning fasting, I feel it's necessary to just make the disclaimer that we aren't promoting any type of eating style or any type of restrictive eating style, and because you had mentioned eating disorders, that research does tell us that eating disorders are genetically linked mental illnesses, that they're life-threatening, and we take them very seriously even while we're joking and having this discussion. So thank you.
That, you know, being really vigorous as far as exercise, you got to be a little careful and consider talking to your doctor about it, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yes. I see myself as, like, you know, I'm a basic scientist. I'm studying the mechanisms of this very interesting and extreme physiologic perturbation. I don't mean to sort of prescribe anything here. You should always talk with your doctor.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, and Denise, did you have any questions?
Not at this time. Just wanted to say really interesting considerations. I had not really thought about the fasted and unfasted states in the outcomes here, but it totally makes sense. So good on you for including that.
Well, there is a lot of data about fasting and from Russian clinics and German clinics, because it used to be a prescription, you know, when you would be chronically ill. It's still the case. Like, you get sent to this Kurorte. So it's like a clinic in some pristine nature place, and a lot of times fasting was prescribed, and drinking these healing waters and so on. And it had like really, like, there's a lot of data that's still kind of unused that had like surprising effects on all kinds of different chronic disorders and
Hmm.
longer term, actually. So it would
Yeah,
be
and
really
yeah,
interesting
I
to
mean,
look.
not to get sort of too far off topic here, but you know, the 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 medical context where, as far as I'm aware, sort of fasting type approaches are actually used clinically and clinically indicated is actually in children for the treatment of drug-resistant epilepsy. So, for example, some kids develop seizures and typically try to control it with anti-epileptic and anti-seizure medications. If the kids are refractory to those medicines and they don't work, what you can do then is you can try to put those children into ketosis by, for example, fasting or ketogenic diets, or you know, sort of medium chain triglyceride therapies and these kinds of things. And so there for sure is a very interesting link between the ketosis state, that physiologic state, which can be induced, for example, by prolonged fasting or starvation, and outcomes like seizures. And exactly how that works, still to this day, nobody quite knows. Um, but you know, these are interesting observations from the medical literature.
Yeah, and yeah, they they always say in these clinics you have to be relaxed and not working and not doing rigorous anything. But yeah, it would be interesting to look into those factors. I know in rejuvenation it's a big thing, like David Sinclair, and so I think all his recommendations are based on what happens in the cells during fasting, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. I'm sorry, we are getting away from the topic.
Yes. Well, and the other thing now is I have to leave at 7 o'clock, or 7 o'clock here, 10 o'clock for you.
Yeah. Okay, then we have 2 minutes left. If anyone has a last question, please go ahead, ask a question. Or in the chat, let me check. Yeah. If not, so you mentioned a few things that you're working on, related to this research. What's the next step in general for you?
Well, we basically from this, we've shown that you can take something complicated like exercise and dissect out a single molecule that is very interesting. And so now we are studying things like fasting and other sort of extreme aspects of physiology with the idea of trying to uncover the molecules associated with that type of physiology. So, for example, in ketosis and fasting, we're trying to identify fasting hormones. We're looking at pythons, because those, pythons, for example, will not eat for 2 months and then will consume their whole body weight in food. So that's sort of an extreme model of that type of physiology. We're looking at hibernation because there's very interesting sort of um, regulation of body temperature in hibernation. And so we're trying to uncover molecules there. And so we're sort of generally interested in connecting molecules to physiology with the goal of potentially understanding those molecules and using that for human health.
That's really interesting. How about being in low oxygen levels?
Hypoxia. Yeah, so that's another, so basically my general thesis here is that, you should, if you're looking for interesting molecules associated with interesting physiology, you should be looking under extreme conditions. Exercise is one example of an extreme condition, but there are many others, including hypoxia, you mentioned. You can think of all sorts of other stuff like, whales, right, have these extreme migrations. That's also very interesting. We're trying to think about ways of actually dissecting that in sort of a proper scientific sense.
Yeah, and birds.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, that would be another topic, and I know we have to leave. But I was always thinking about PTSD type of things, and not just always using like pain on a cage. You know what we do with rats,
Right.
but different type of traumas. But anyways, we could go on and on. But I want to let you go. Thank you so much for coming. Please come back anytime, maybe with updates, maybe continuing interesting discussions. We really appreciate the time you offered us, and we wish you all the best for your research, and we will be following you.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so fun. Whoop, he's gone.
Yep.
He wastes no time. Okay, next.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, for asking questions, for being here. We will have tomorrow early morning room, 9 a.m. EST, with Dr. DeSantis. She's joining us from Spain, Alicante. She recently became a professor there and is talking about she's actually a physicist, and she developed brain imaging in humans in a way that we can map microglia and astrocyte activation, which is really exciting because nobody really did that before. So I'm really looking forward to her talk tomorrow morning. And then we'll have a different type of talk tomorrow evening, that we recently had a book author here that we interviewed, and we will have another book author, woman, sharing her story. and how she overcame abuse in her life. And she also created an amazing organization to help other women. So we will interview her tomorrow because our motivation is sharing stories, giving people a platform to share stories that are true about themselves or about their work. And I think we can maybe generate change and perspective by sharing our stories, and just be here also to listen and learn. So yeah, I hope to hear you all back soon, and we appreciate everyone, and thank you all for coming. Okay, I'll close the room. Oh,
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much.
It was great.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
hosting.
thanks. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Bye, everyone.